Hey everybody, my name is Mike Montgomery, and today I'm going to be building out the set for the Flagrant 2 podcast. This is going to be a super fun video and a really cool out-of-the-box build. So let's get started on Modern Builds. Today's video is made possible by Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com/modernbuilds for your free trial and to build your own custom website. Flagrant 2, for those who aren't familiar, is a podcast by Andrew Schulz with his co-hosts Kaz and Akash. They're really great, it's hilarious, it's a bunch of bro talk, sports talk. Realistically, it just feels like you're hanging out with your homies for a couple of hours talking shit. My buddy Binueta from Homemade Modern put me onto the show at some point last year, and I've been a fan ever since. And coincidentally, Ben and Andrew got connected on Instagram, and whenever Andrew signed a lease on a new studio/creative space, he asked if Ben and myself wanted to be involved in the build out. The timing really ended up working great. Ben and I both had a couple of reasons to be in New York over the winter, so we sort of piggybacked this build onto those trips. Now, this studio space that Andrew got is super legit. It is super pro. Before we got there, the property managers painted everything in these studios completely white. Immediately when you walk into the studio, there is a giant open loft style creative space with huge windows along one wall. We built out a full living room area as well as a stage so that they can do shows, watch parties, or anything else they want in the space. But there's also 2 individual studios. Studio A is a pretty good sized room. Me and Ben were able to fit 2 individual podcast studios in this space on opposite walls to maximize that square footage. On one side of the room, I built the set for Flagrant 2, and on the other side of the room, Ben built a separate podcast studio that will be later announced. And whenever his video goes live, I'll leave a link down in the description. The first couple nights that we were there, Schulz came through the studio and we sort of brainstormed what we wanted the space to feel like.
You know what I mean? It's like guys hanging out, telling stories, comfy, you're not gonna fucking think it goes here, nobody's gonna be offended, don't bite your tongue, anything you say. How do we...
It sets the rules.
Sets the tone, like you're in a speakeasy, right? Like this is... Maybe that's it. Maybe there's a world where like this is a bar cart.
Yeah.
Something. Do you want to drink? Oh yeah, have a pool. How'd you open that? Oh, this is because man cave implies you're hiding from your wife.
Should it be more like Don Draper's office kind of a thing?
Yo.
Now we're going. We are 1960s advertisers.
Like when he and Roger Sterling kind of like hang out. Like they shut the door, they make the secretary leave. There's like ice clinking. One guy's talking shit, the other guy's like sitting back smoking a cigar.
Okay. It's the office of flagrancy, and anything that happens once you step in this room. It's the office of flagrancy.
Bro, that's it. With that information, I knew I was looking for a lot of wood, a lot of warm tones, as well as built-ins. Offices in the 50s through the 70s had these big acoustic walls to control echoes. There was also a lot of giant built-ins, whether they were bookshelves or bars or some kind of panel wall. To control the echoes in the room, we used these fiberglass acoustic panels that are covered in suede, and they're made by a company called Overtone Sound. In fact, they can cut them into any size in any shape. We had pieces that were 9 inches, 12 inches, and 18 inches wide that I moved around until I found a layout that I liked. And so once I had my plan of action, it was really just time to start building. I cut the backing for each of these panels out of 1/4-inch plywood, and if I was building this project again, I probably would have used 1/2-inch plywood. That way everything would be a little bit more rigid while I was working with it. At the time, I was really just thinking about reducing weight, but that doesn't matter so much since we're screwing into 2x4s behind the wall. And here, you see me gluing on oak 1x2s to create the perimeter around each of these acoustic panels. I'm using the 1x2s to hide the yellow edges of these acoustic panels by basically sandwiching it. And as you can see, the backer panel extends past the 1x2s. That way we have plenty of room to screw above and below the panel into the 2x4 studs behind the wall. I cut 3/4-inch oak plywood to go between the acoustic panels along each of the assemblies. And I found that it was easiest just to assemble and glue everything in place, making sure not to get any of that glue on the suede. And I've got to give it up to the Home Depot in New York City. It really had nice looking oak plywood. The combination of this wood grain and the gray from the suede is exactly what we were looking for when we mentioned Mad Men aesthetics. The rest of the panels went together the same way except for this one, which has a shelf built into it that I made out of an oak 1x6. I used some screws to attach these L brackets to the bottom of the 1x6 to create a little extra support. Then I could glue everything in place. And instead of using any clamps, I actually screwed through the plywood backer and into the 2x4 underneath the assembly. Then I just waited for that glue to cure, and that held everything in place so that I could remove the screws from the 2x4 underneath. I'll leave a link in the description to a solid metal 12-inch framing square. If you don't have one already, you should. They're the best tool to have on everyday DIY projects, in my opinion. As you can see, I did have to use a chisel to carve out a little bit of the corners on these plywood pieces where they met at the angle brackets. With a little bit of hindsight, or maybe a little bit of preparation, I could have avoided that, but it was a simple fix in the moment. Once I had all the panel assemblies put together, it was time to start installing them onto the wall, and I got my buddy Ben from Homemade Modern to help me out with this. Instead of doing a ton of measuring and marking, we actually used the panels in place to make sure all of our spacing was correct as we worked. We also kept a level handy, that way everything stayed straight as we were installing it. But I've got to say, it was really cool seeing this thing finally coming together, and I really loved that 12-inch wood strip down the center of the set. That, along with the shelf, really helps balance everything out. And even though they'll be sitting down the majority of the time they're podcasting and recording here, I wanted to extend the backdrop all the way up to the truss, that way this studio was as versatile as possible. And I just cut a few more 3/4-inch oak panels to fill out the rest of this corner. I really liked the walnut panels in Don Draper's office, but I was scared that was going to be a little dark to film with, so that's why we went with oak. This was probably the most rewarding moment of this entire build, getting to see these suede panels finally fit in place on the wall. I could see this whole thing coming together, and I was just so excited to keep making progress on this project.
Every single one. 1-800.
Oh wait, actually. Super pro. Anywhere they were visible, I used trim head screws, which have a really small head on them, and blend with wood filler easily. But on these 1x2 trim pieces on the bottom of the panels, I was able to use my 16 gauge finish nailer. There we go. I am very happy and proud to announce that today's episode of Modern Builds is sponsored by Squarespace. In fact, they are back on board for 2020, and that's amazing. Squarespace, just like Modern Builds, is all about doing things yourself. Here on Modern Builds, we build things, whether that's furniture, home renovations, or anything in between. But on Squarespace, you can build your own website, and you need zero website building experience. Squarespace's library of built-in designer templates look incredible right out of the box. I'm serious, if you can drag and drop photos and edit text blocks, that is all you need to be able to do. If you're a maker or builder, you can use Squarespace to create a portfolio. That way clients can see your work before they decide whether or not to work with you. You can showcase your best projects in image galleries, you can create an About You page, and finally they can even contact you directly through your Squarespace site. Not to mention, if you want to sell directly online, there is no limit to the number of products that you can sell on your Squarespace site. And right now, for you guys watching, you can follow the link down in the description. That's squarespace.com/modernbuilds to get a free trial and to build out your entire website before you put in any of your credit card info. And then whenever it's time for your website to go live, don't forget to use the code ModernBuilds at checkout for 10% off your first Squarespace site. So one more huge thanks to Squarespace for continuing to support Modern Builds, and thanks to you guys for continuing to watch Modern Builds. Now back to the build. Holy cow. So this set is really coming together, and I love the way it looks. The one problem that we still do have is covering up all of these outlets down here. I'm sure there's gonna be plenty of things that need plugged in back here and plenty of wires that are gonna be running to the desk. So I'm gonna use more oak plywood to basically make a slip cover that slides right underneath this oak 1x2. I recently found out that making continuous grain miter cuts on plywood really isn't as tough as you would think. It only involves 2 beveled cuts with your circular saw, and as long as you have a good straight edge paired with it, it's easy to do. Once I had finished cutting my pieces to width, I grabbed my Gorilla wood glue and I laid down a pretty thick bead along that beveled cut. Then I used my speed squares and spring clamps to hold the pieces in place while I finish nailed all of my pieces together. Now that 12-foot wall is longer than I could get out of a single sheet of plywood, so I connected 2 pieces together to span that length. I just used another piece of 3/4-inch plywood as the splint between the 2 pieces. Like I mentioned earlier, I didn't want any of these pieces to be permanently fixed. Since that's where all of those cables and plugs were, I want to make sure that they're easily accessible. So I just used shims to make sure that this panel didn't dip with the bow in the floor. Then I trimmed everything out with those miter offcuts from earlier. The only thing left to do now was to add some furniture and let the AV guys do their thing.
I think it's important that we start out the episode by thanking some of the people that made this new studio possible. First of all, Ben Uyeda. I gotta give a huge shout out to Ben Uyeda, along with his business partner, another brilliant architect, creator, do-it-yourself guy, Mike Montgomery. You can find Mike at Modern Bills on Instagram, and Ben is Ben Uyeda. And these guys are fucking geniuses. Literally went to Home Depot, got all this wood. Say again?
Man shit.
Real man shit.
These motherfuckers just took blocks of wood and just turned it into this massive, incredible space.
It was unreal. There's something else that's
It's
different.
not a podcast anymore.
Son, what is it?
It feels like
TV show.
It definitely feels like a TV show.
Yo, it's a TV show, but we got to stop using the word TV
It's
to
a
qualify content. You know what I mean? Like,
Show.
you might watch an HBO show on your phone, but this is a show.
It's a series.
This is a series.
It's got new studio smell in here.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
smell like
Very much.
Bro, I love you, man.
I'm glad it worked out so well.
Absolutely, dude.
Thanks, guys. One more shout out to Andrew and everybody involved with the Flagrant 2 podcast. It was really cool getting to do this build, and I'm curious to see where it goes next. And I'm excited to see how the space evolves. From episode 1 to episode 2, there's been a huge difference, but it's cool seeing them actually fill out the space with artwork, with a bar, and whatever else they're gonna do. If you wanna check out any other modern builds videos, I've got home renovation videos, I've got furniture building series, I've even got an episode where I build out a clothing store. I'm sure there'll be one that you like. And last thing, I am taking 2020 really seriously for you guys. I wanna make amazing content, and I'm really curious to see where modern builds can go this year. Last year we passed 1 million subscribers, which was the biggest milestone and something that I almost thought was impossible when I started. It was the goal from day one, and now that we've reached it, the sky's the limit. So for all the day one fans that are still watching, I appreciate you guys from the bottom of my heart. And for everybody that's new, watching modern builds for the first few times, welcome, and I really hope that you enjoy all of the content that I'm making. The last couple of videos I filmed while I was in Schulz's studios are gonna be coming out this week, so make sure and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you stay updated every time I post new videos. Thanks a ton for watching, and we will see you next time on Modern Builds. Bye, everybody.
This is about being really pitch a product. If I just stand here and go, hey, this is a solid, oh, it's an amazing, oh, you should get it, you're not gonna buy it, not at all. But if you hit it with the mic rock and roll, you know, this oak right here is one of the best possible oaks that you've ever seen in your entire life.
What kind of ugly truck is this? So, what are you doing? 1-800-SUPER-PRO.
Gas snacks. Joe Coy. Hey, we got Shark. What they did? That was their life. Locally.